Let's try it this way now. Have you ever done have you ever talked to kids and you're like, I feel like they're not listening. I just finished doing a whole video on this particular subject, and somewhere in the middle my microphone stopped working, and I was like, okay, it's like talking to my children. No one listens. Here, wait. Now let me double check, make sure my microphone is working. Okay, there we go. Ta 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 ta. It's working. It's working. That's good. All right, friends. Listen, I want to share a book with you, but I also want to tell you about an article I read, and so it's gonna take a minute. And if you can be patient, we'll talk about it, and I will give you really good proof that Michael Heiser's hermeneutics was very flawed. Okay. I never realized how popular Heiser was. I just looked him up one day because one of my favorite scholars out there mentioned him, and I was like, oh, okay, let's find out. I'm always willing to learn more from someone else that's willing to teach. My understanding is he was a really nice guy. Okay, that he was a good fella, and people that knew him loved him and cared for him and all of that. Problem is, here's a problem that we have really if you live in the evangelical world. We have this trend of unintellectualism. People don't want to use their own mind, and it's really prevalent, like in the entire culture right now. People just don't want to think for themselves. Okay. We want someone to tell us the answers. And to be honest, that's how I started studying the Bible. I said, someone has to have this all figured out because, I mean, people spend 50, 100 years studying their Bibles. And so I figure that we've had it all, everybody would have it figured it out. Turns out, not really. There's a lot of stuff that it's in the Bible that people believe and talk about and follow, that is they call that is orthodoxy and all of that, that you don't even know where it came from. Do people don't even know where the issue, who thought of this and why and all of that. Anyways, one of the the largest videos out there that I have made, uh, where people have responded to a video I did, was a critique on Michael Heiser. I mean, when I read a little bit of his book and listened to his videos and stuff, and I was like, oh, who takes this seriously? Why would you take this seriously? And it turns out a lot of people belong to the cult of Michael Heiser, and they are angry and adamant that he's right. So I have nothing to say to you, friend. If you are dead set against logic and a good understanding of how to study the Bible, then you really have a problem. But I do want to share an article with you. If the gentleman, a professor, PhD as well, because people seem to care about those letters a lot, uh, wrote an article about him and about his book, The Unseen Realm, and pointed out some of the flaws in the hermeneutical uh, 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 the hermeneutical framework that he used, Michael Heiser used. Okay, so I'm only gonna read. Uh, so there's a couple things that are really crucial, but there's a couple things. Okay, let me address this one. Michael Heiser has a Deuteronomy 32:8, the sons of God versus the sons of Israel. Okay, but There is really only one textual evidence that the sons of God are anywhere in the Bible. Okay, the way the translation work, there's more textual evidence for the work. The hi. There's more textual evidence for the sons of Israel than the sons of God. And let me share a little bit of it with you. There is okay, let me actually bring the screen so I can show you. I want to share it with you because it's important to see these things. Okay, here we go. Here's the article, and here we are. It says, let me scroll up so we start. Okay, the entire edifice of Heiser's argument rests, by his own account, on a single textual judgment that Deuteronomy 32:8 originally read Sons of God, Ben Elohim, rather than the Masoretic text Sons of Israel. This reading attested in a Dead Sea Scroll fragment 4QDUT, and has been preferred by a number of critical scholars on the grounds of the standard text critical principles of lexico that word right there, and the general antiquity of some Qumran textual traditions. Heiser treats his preference as effectively settled and proceeds to erect upon to it a comprehensive theology of the divine counsel, the allotment of nations, and the cosmic geography of redemptive history. Here's the problem with, here's essentially what he's saying. We have texts that we take, the ancient manuscripts that we use to translate the Bible. Okay, so there is more than one manuscript for a particular passage of the Bible, is Deuteronomy, for instance. And so some of them have textual differences. Okay, one of the biggest recent issues that we had was Wes Huff. He literally said in the Joe Rogan podcast that they found a manuscript of the book of Isaiah, and it was word for word, punctuation for punctuation, the exact same thing that we have on some of the newer manuscripts, which is in fact not true. Okay, so that's what we were saying, that there's a lot of there is texts, ancient texts, from where we get our translations. Okay, now Michael Heiser took the one the from the Qumran. They said whoopsie, let's get rid of this. What is that? Let me go back. Took the Qumran that is actually says Sons of God, and he ran with it. But then, you have, now he's here, the author of this particular article will state the following. The Masoretic text, that is one, representing the mainstream Jewish scribal tradition across many centuries and geographical locations, reads Sons of Israel. You have the first one. Then you have the Samaritan Pentateuch as an independent textual tradition. Likewise, reads Sons of Israel. Now you have two. The Targums, the Aramaic paraphrastic translation used in signal worship, follow the Masoretic reading. The Peshitta, the ancient Syriac translation, follows it as well. The Septuagint reads Angels of God, which Heiser treats as corroborating his reading, but which in fact represents a distinct interpretive tradition that domesticates the phrase in angelology rather than confirming a divine counsel framework in which itself seems to reflect theological interpretation of Hebrew wordage rather than a variant text. Against all this, the Sons of God reading is present in one fragmentary manuscript from one sectarian community. And that's the thing. When you have texts that say Sons of Israel and only one or two that says Sons of God, you got to take your odds. Okay, so all our Bible translations have gone through a process in which They take all those things, all these texts, they make decisions as to what they're going to put on the Bible, and when they have a lot of conflicting texts, they in fact make a theological decision in order to tell you this is what this means, this is what it says. Okay? Now, is someone outside?
No, it's just raining.
I don't see rain.
It's not raining.
I don't see rain. It's not raining. Okay. So here's, to me, this is the linchpin on the whole thing. Okay. And let's work through it together. The hermeneutical problem. Okay. Let's say, okay, 100 years from now, you start reading the news from the day, you read articles from today, and you also read Harry Potter. Okay? You make an assumption that Harry Potter is actually interpreting all the hidden things that are not told to you in the news. Okay? Therefore, you follow that. And here's the problem with that, friends. Harry Potter is fantasy. All right. So you cannot use that necessarily it can tell you some things about our cultural right now, but in reality, it can't tell you anything about the true state of affairs of the world when Harry Potter was written. It is the same thing with the Book of Enoch. It is the same thing with all those extra Second Temple texts that we have. It is people trying to interpret things that they don't understand in the Bible, in the books of Genesis, Deuteronomy, all those books, right? All these fantastical things. And it's the way that they interpret these books. But let me tell you something about it, okay? You today have a better chance of getting a true understanding of what the Old Testament writers were thinking and talking about than the people in the first century. Okay, because we have a lot of archaeological discoveries nowadays. They can tell you a lot more about the things that happened in the Old Testament. Okay, not that long ago, people were wondering if King David was real. Now we're just trying to figure out the extent of his kingdom. Okay, so we found things about for Solomon. Okay, things like that people were wondering where, hundreds of years ago, were they ever real? And the issue is now, it's not that they were or were not real. We're just trying to figure out how big things were back then. Okay, now you cannot read the Book of Enoch and take it as, oh, they knew what they were talking about. Okay, you today know more what you're talking about than the people that wrote the Book of Enoch. Now, to the point. Here's the problem with Heiser's interpretation of this. Even granting Heiser's preferred textual reading of Deuteronomy 32:8, let's say that you do take it and it says sons of God. A second and equal serious problem emerges at the level of hermeneutical method. Hermeneutics is just the science of biblical studies. There are certain rules that we use, okay? And so you can't bring your cultural 21st century cultural mores into the Old Testament, because they had uh, their own cultural mores as well. Okay, so what he's saying. So that's one of the things you have to read in context. You have to take the easier passages in order to interpret the harder passages. There's all these rules of hermeneutics that help you understand the Bible. Okay, these are not secrets. You just kind of have to look them up and you'll understand them. Okay, so here's the thing. Okay, even granting Heiser's preferred textual reading of Deuteronomy 32:8, a second and equally serious problem emerges at the level of hermeneutic method. The texts that form the backbone of Heiser's divine counsel argument are almost without exception drawn from the genres least suited to serve as divine counsel argument as the governing framework for systematic biblical theology, poetry. Okay, that one of the biggest problems we have right now in our generation is the lack of education. All right, you there was this one article that my husband was talking about that says that if you give a young person nowadays a both an article and a piece of fiction, I think it was, they can't tell the difference, right? An opinion
or real news.
Or news.
Yep.
An opinion or news, they can't tell the difference between
These
the
are
two of them.
Ivy League graduates.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have a very big problem with lack of education, which is reflected in why people are so fond of Michael Heiser. Why? Because he makes a mistake, a very simple hermeneutical mistake when it comes to this thing. He uses poetry as fact. And poetry, Hebrew poetry, is very elaborate. Okay, it has a lot of meaning to it. So there is passages where the the prophet is saying your daughters will be destroyed and stuff like that. When you don't understand, he's not really talking about women, he's talking about the cities. Okay, because but you have to know, you have to be well versed on Hebrew poetry, parallelism, anti, all this other stuff that actually I'm working on putting something together so that we can talk about that. At any rate, that's that he says here. Uh, uh, it says Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 82, 89. All of these are poetic passages. Prophetic taunt and lament, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, apocalyptic visions, Daniel 10, and the elevated cosmic poetry of the wisdom tradition. Heiser's interpretive procedure is to read these texts as straightforward cosmological claims and then to use them as a framework within which plainer narrative and didactic texts are read. Let me talk to you about the divine counsel. Okay, I don't hear the that I don't believe that the Bible is true. That is not what I'm saying. And that or that the Bible is copied from other traditions. That is not what I'm saying either. Okay, that's a more involved different conversation. But the Bible talks about divine counsel, right? There's a God sitting in the throne, and there's all these guys next to him, and all of that. Okay, if you know anything about Greek mythology, you will think Mount Olympus. Okay, every culture has something like that in their history, in their mythological creations, and all of that. Okay, it's just the way people interpret certain things, and that's how they write it. It does. They're not saying, they're using their cultural understanding to tell you something. So you have to know the culture in order to be able to understand what they're saying. They're not saying there's an actual divine council out there, there's all these people and out, and I saw that and all of that. What they're telling you is God is above everything else. Okay? God is above. That's it. And they're just reflecting in using their cultural river in order to communicate an idea. Okay? And that's the problem with Michael Heiser. He reads that straightforward. He has no understanding of biblical poetry, and that's sad. Okay. Okay. So the linchpin for him, Psalm 82, right? So let's jump to that one. It says Psalm 82 illustrates the problem acutely. The psalm depicts a scene in which God stands in a divine assembly of judges and gods, Elohim, right? for their corrupt for their corrupt exercise of justice, pronouncing their mortality. Heiser read this as a straightforward account of a divine council of genuinely supernatural personal beings who have been entrusted with the governance of the nations and have failed in that trust. But the genre of text, what appears to be a judicial sum employing the language of imagery of the divine court, does not straightforwardly license this reading. The gods of Psalm 82 can possibly be read as human rulers. And here's something that you have got to have in your pocket every time you're reading the Old Testament. Okay? Don't miss this part, because this is the most important part, probably, of this whole thing. I want to make sure you know this. But the genre of text, what appears to be a traditional psalm employing the language and imagery of the divine court, does not straightforwardly license this reading. The gods of Psalm 82 can possibly read as human rulers employing the honorific language of the ancient Near East kinship ideology. People on the old times, in Testament times, would have thought of their kings, or would have referred to a king as a god, a human king as a god. I don't know how many of you read the book, read or watched that movie, The 300, right? There is this one scene where Leonidas is going up there to fight with the 300 and all of that. And then the guy, I'm trying to remember this, the conquering nation, right, that's coming in against them, right? He's a god, right? They see him as a god and they talk about him as a god. And Leonidas grabs his spear and throws it at him and he bleeds. And then they realize these are human beings talked to as gods, but they're not really gods. That is exactly what's happening here, okay? It's an interpretation. Kings used to be thought as of gods. You have that example in one of the Gospels where they say, oh no, the Herod, remember the voice of a god, and then he dies, okay? So that's what you're looking for. Okay, so kinship ideology. As the Johannine Jesus himself suggests when citing this very psalm. And then you have Jesus talking about the psalm. And Jesus says, literally tells them, you're the gods, the Israelite. You're the sons of God. So there's a lot to it. I'm going to link this article. Do yourself a favor, read it, understand it. But there's a lot of issues with Michael Heiser's theology, how he exercised hermeneutics and all that. And, you know, he had a huge following. And it's okay to listen to scholars and all of that, but you cannot substitute your own their understanding for your own. Okay, you have to read and read critically. Now, I'm going to recommend something to you, and I hope you take the time to read it with an open mind. Now, the counter Michael Heiser is John Walton. Now, he has a series of books explaining the ancient Near East cultural river, as he calls them, which in turn helps us understand what the Bible is really talking about when it says things like divine counsel, the sons of God, and why we're reading. We are if you believe that the Bible, that the book of Genesis is speaking about the actual physical creation of the universe, you need to go back and reading it, because that is not what that's about. Okay, so let me share my screen again with you real quick. Window. Okay. This book, Demons and Spirits, the Biblical Theology. What this book will help you is understand the writings of the biblical authors in their own uh, in their own context. Okay, um, here's some of the most passages that I thought were pretty good, and so one of the things he says, the facts regarding when we think of a document conveying information, we often think of a book like an encyclopedia, whose contents consist of essential of a list of facts. These facts, in turn, are represented in such a way that they can be easily understood by any reader of the document. This objectivity of information is the goal of those who write encyclopedias. Consequently, when we read the Bible for information, we tend to read it as if it were an encyclopedia. That is, we treat its passages as if they contain clear and objectively stated facts. The facts are then lifted off the page and in positions in theological arguments. The assumed objectivity of the information is defended by invoking clarity or perspicuity of the scripture, which is taken to mean that discerning the meaning of any passage in scripture will be instinctively intuitive to anyone who reads it. Okay? Now, the Bible, however, was not written to convey information like an encyclopedia. Rather, it conveys information more like a conversation. By this, we mean that the meaning it contains is tailored to its particular audience, specifically the audience to whom the final redacted form of the original literary composition would have been addressed. Okay, it's all like to say that before you start interpreting the Bible in whichever form and crazy way you want to interpret it, you have got to understand that this was not written to you. This was not written about you, but it is for you. So you want to get a cultural understanding. Okay, let me put it this way, real simple. I recommend this book. I'll put a link for you down there, but let me just make this really, really simple for you. Okay. The Bible was written in a cultural context, and it meant something to the people that it was originally written to. Okay. It spoke to them about something that they knew about. Okay. Now, if you're just going to be a reader of the Bible and you're just doing your 15-minute devotional, whatever that you do, and you think that 5 minutes on the Bible, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. You can definitely encounter God in the Bible and all of that. You can read the Bible and you can make a habit of reading the Bible. But studying the Bible is something completely different, utterly different. Studying the Bible is reading critically, okay? Because the Bible is not telling you what to think. What they do, the biblical authors do, is present information to you, tell you a story, and then you're supposed to get the moral of the story yourself. And with everything that you know about God, you know his character, you know who he is. What are you supposed to take out of this particular passage? And then, but that's why we call it study, because now you need to know a little bit of what was going on at the time, a little bit of the cultural things that were happening. Who are these people that we're talking about? Okay, so all that to say, Bible reading is not the same as Bible study. Okay, two different things. But I can't imagine a better time than spending your time Bible studying. Okay, and the problem is not one. The Bible expands centuries and cultural differences. And so to think that one person can have it all figured out and understand all of it, it's impossible. Okay. So we're humans and we're flawed, and someone's going to make a mistake. So I guess this is all to help you try to understand that while Michael Heiser was probably a really nice human being, Unfortunately, his writing and his hermeneutical framework was very, very flawed. And it is going to take you being a discerning Christian and a discerning reader to see where he has wrong. But if you don't read the Bible, if you don't read your Bible every single day, and you make a habit of reading through it over and over again, you're you're very susceptible to being taken in, kind of like the deliverance ministries. They know they know you don't know. They know you don't study. They know you don't read. And so they can sell you whatever snake oil they want, and you're going to buy it. Why? Because you have not learned to discern the voice of God for yourself. Read, study, watch some videos from people that you like, and listen critically. Don't just buy everything that they sell, because most of them lie anyways. At any rate, I hope this helps you in some way. I'm gonna link the article I gave you, that I read a little bit from you, and I'll link the book from John Walton. And there's a couple. I have a couple books on prophecy that you might, if you really want to grow in your understanding of the Bible, you're gonna want to read. But most of everything, if you haven't started anywhere, you haven't read, you read a little bit here and there, the very first step is to start with just reading the Bible beginning to end, and over and over and over and over again, until, and then start answering questions for yourself. A whole lot of the questions, what I've noticed is that if you read with a critical lens and a little bit of understanding of the cultural river of the Bible, you can answer these questions for yourself. You don't need anybody to tell you. You just have to do a little bit of digging. Stay curious, and don't let anybody. Let me part with this. If you go to a church, if you go to a school, or if you know someone that you're in the Bible study with them and you guys talk about all kinds of things, and they say, and you ask something and they say that's blasphemous, or they use fear tactics to keep you from asking questions, that's a problem. God does not want you to be, the God is not afraid of your questions. He is good with that. Why? Because he is the truth. All right. Anyways, God bless. I'll link all the stuff below, and hopefully you can read them, catch up to them, and you might, end up growing in your faith, because that's all the purpose of this is, help you grow in your faith. Anyways, God bless. Bye bye.